Thank you for the invitation and for the possibility to speak here about our research. I'd like to introduce you to 3 results from our browser art project conducted during the last 3 years. And this gives me the opportunity to point out where we saw the challenges in face of software retirements online from a basic research point of view. And I hope to discuss with you then how our research can connect also to issues of conservation preservation. So what do we study? This collage, so this is the browser art website of the SPB, the digital image. This is our research context, but the collage that I was referring to is here. This indicates the browser art, or at least some of them that we found. They all provide a certain view on the net, how to frame it, how to deal with it, how to get there. And generally, user-friendliness and speed is something that drives development in the commercial world of browsers, and this is not primarily the focus in most of these pieces. Many of the applications stick rather with the users than subscribing to something like the ideal of transparency, like fading out of consciousness in order to objectively provide the pure view on the information we are seeking. We look at the aesthetic aspects of these browsers, so these are really functioning browser applications by artists, and also at the political ones. The diversification of how users are lured into the internet opens up new perspectives on a larger cultural background, and the implications are pertinent. In terms of methods, we concluded that also for the big picture, it is key to look closely at how these pieces of software art are made. Why should art historians bother looking into the code of coded artworks? We see it as a site of creative decision-making. Some idiosyncrasies are to be found there, for instance, how variables are named, how dynamics are created in unconventional manners. Sometimes with a surface inspection, we cannot determine what is actually the case. So information is needed also from the code to provide a more sustained interpretation. We decided to work with programmers, with Martina Richter, for instance, a computer scientist and artist, and only with her help we could find out and explain some riddles, for instance, how this marking with the mouse is meant, what layer it's actually touching, and we found out that also what we see here as a grid is actually defined as text. And therefore, we can do everything that we could do with the text. So the functionality is that of a text field. Thus, we profit from that deep dive and opt to include the view into the code levels. So this much for a general attitude in our research project. And now I'd like to highlight 3 threads in our research that led to 3 forms of publications that we are currently finalizing. This is to show you how we encountered and then tackled the current challenges to keep up with the collateral damage of online art in face of the volatile environment these works live in. So what is there? Navigation is a special issue within a publication series of the DFG, this priority program, the digital image, and in there we conducted a methodological experiment of documenting browser art. Then Browser Talk is a source book based on interviews with the artists that reveal many more technical information about these browsers than is broadly available. And How to Look into Software Art is a booklet that collects and reflects our own visualizations done in order to study and portray coded art. So let's begin with the first. This methodological experiment had a precursor event, so to say, and this slide exemplifies the challenges faced in net art. It is an omnipresent situation, namely the retirement or sunsetting of software, and in this case, Adobe Flash, for instance. If such sunsetting is announced beforehand, artists can react and reprogram the work. However, that needs constant caring and, of course, time and, of course, financial backgrounds. And the suspension of Adobe Flash happened in January 2021. which affected also the work of my research group, of course, then frantically analyzing the artworks based on Flash the days before it closed down. We were aware that we could probably access these works with something like Ruffle, but who would guarantee that it really looks the same? Recognizing then, after we saw what we did in this stressful situation, our Flash-induced documentation results, after seeing that, the question came up of how to proceed in the future with such kinds of documentations, how to decide which path to take, because we did different things. Instead of determining one of our paths as the future solution, we decided to repeat and expand this challenge by inviting further scholars from different backgrounds. And so we kind of made a thorough description, a task description. This is only one excerpt out of that, and we wanted to be as crystal clear as possible to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because it's only then that the results could be comparable in the end. So I'm reading only the purple parts here. We would like to invite you to join our academic experiment. We reach out to scholars of different disciplinary backgrounds more systematically and ask them if they would document one specific artistic browser as comprehensive and thorough as possible, in a way they think it would produce the most beneficial material for future researchers or audiences, and to reflect on the methods they adopted for doing so. And we then offered a suggestion to do it in a 3-step procedure, namely first to document, second to give a narration of the document, so what we would hand over to the future generation, and in the third step to reflect about the own documentation, which is what we would publish then. As an exemplary software piece, we picked co.kr, one of the wrong browsers by the artist group Jodi. It was chosen because of its iconic status and because we thought that a lot of prior knowledge does not help much. So we ourselves wouldn't have much advantage over our invitees. And maybe some words of how this experiment can be framed conceptually. There are 2 examples that are kind of related. One is a similar approach that was tried out with the book called Tenprint, in which scholars from code and software studies centered their articles around one and the same one-line command in BASIC that you see here also. The publication seems to promote an experimental approach insofar as all contributors agree to center their attention on this one-liner. However, we could also say that it's actually a multi-authored monograph focused on a unique work which is kind of quite frequent in art history and the humanities. However, the 10 contributors chose a process of communal authorship, thus decided to speak with a single voice, but nonetheless offering multiple points of view. This sparked a little bit of criticism, as in this way disagreement and incompatibilities were not carved out, were rather concealed. And this pitfall we try to avoid with our conceptual design. So in contrast, our request to the authors was not only to analyze one and the same browser of our choice and then build up their interpretative paths from that, but we aimed at something more binding and authoritative, namely a best practice. And the second example, one of the largest research endeavors of our times in astronomy adopted parallel synchronization procedures. In 2019, 4 different research groups who had deliberately no contact between each other were sent on a mission for the so-called blind imaging. They were provided with the same measurement data from the set of telescopes in order to derive therefrom the theoretical appearance of a black hole. With their individual algorithmic techniques, software packages, and imaging pipelines, they reconstructed the data. In the end, they compared and fused their outcomes in order to stabilize a joint message. In our experiment on documenting our browser, We started from a similar stance. The authors were asked to find individual solutions in isolation. All used their own specific hard software setups, their own approaches to deal with the same phenomena, but then the target was less a composed cross-validation and more an acknowledgement of the productivity of diversity regarding the analytical approaches. It turned out we gathered a fascinating variety of solutions, so I can just give you some highlights, some spotlights. As expected, the approaches differ considerably, and this has also to do with how the person explicitly or implicitly interpreted the task at hand, although we want to be really very clear. So, was it documenting this browser the best way, or was it developing a framework for documenting all browsers the best way? And additionally, how he or she defined the browser for herself. Most of the contributions report at least one kind of U-turn in their method due to a variety of reasons, while several participants adopted a decidedly analytical approach. Some had stronger conceptual filters in place than others, separating syntax from semantics and then breaking down into smaller semantic entities, or separating insider from outsider knowledge. Others had more indeterminate and open way of exploration first, but then came up with labels for structuring findings later, etc. All contributors had an implicit or explicit focus when conceptualizing their documentation. Some went along with guiding design principles, others carved out what cultural positions and theories they could link to that. So in total, we asked, of course, for the best solution and got many bests back. Some approaches could be seen as consecutive steps, others were more complementary. And this all in the face of one and the same browser, so the diversity coming in with different applications not yet addressed here. Then the second path. For our research, we developed a questionnaire of about 50 questions regarding technicalities, production process, concept, and also cultural background. So far, we conducted a total of 27 interviews with 32 artists and programmers. The conversations clearly revealed that virtually all of our interviewees encountered software rot. Most of them have lost their own work due to the sunsetting of software. For sure, people have different attitudes and approaches towards that creeping obsolescence. Some change their mind over time and retrospectively regret the poor documentation 20 years back. As online art of some genres is always on show, often the real-time effect gives the artist no time, real-time effect when something is sunset, so when the infrastructure breaks, gives the artist no time to fix before a potential visitor can detect the ruin. Something not working always looks abundant in this realm. The works become thin skeletons of broken links and past functionalities, with no flesh and surely no full aesthetic experience. Seeing such signs of decay, the user knows it is not worth spending any more second on this site. So it is often seen as being a hopeless case. Sometimes there is still partial functionality which can be mistaken for the full artistic intention. Thus, the artists tag their ruins as temporarily out of order, or they want to say that that's actually not it. And in order to minimize actually the damage to their reputation. If we roam the homepages of artists online and focus on hints for this functionality, we find really several strategies, and some messages show that artists feel the need also for procuring social repair. Artists' strategies often show their versatility in going productively with the flow. It is fascinating to get to know which workarounds or makeshift solutions were tried and which succeeded. Here we learn something about the priorities of their art, or what priorities they put on their art. And we encounter ranges of strategies that range from relatively quick fixes to fundamental reconceptualizations, touching the remodeling of basic relations, notions, and genres. In the latter case, often conservationists and curators are also involved and have, and what we can see also is that people here in the room have engaged also in this endeavor. So I really can't go through all of these examples. It's kind of a first typology of the strategies the artists have. We have something like a replacement of a live situation with a video documentation. We have a rewriting of the code as performance, so taking the misery and making it a really different kind of work, making it from a finished, finalized piece to a performative piece. Then we have holistic video documentation known as Dulard-Sarkovsky method, rewriting the code really in a radical fashion or in a kind of a versioning or in a code risk situation. Others, of course, negotiate the permission from the companies involved, and others do let go. And if we go with the latter, here I'd just like to highlight the artist's work, or the work by the artist Gazira Babeli, who created several artworks in the virtual environment Second Life. And here we have Nudes Descending. So it's a work that is reminiscent of the Duchamp work. The problem is that it's a scripted work, and in 2007 the Second Life platform changed the physics engine, and then the canvases did not go down that stair the way they used to, but just fell down. And later, if we are not code literate, and if art historians do not try to read that code of the script, what we are left with is this, basically. So these are the screenshots. We have kind of 5 pictures that show the work in 2 different online installations close up, and there are further 4 in the background, so where we see a little bit the surrounding of the work, but that's basically it. So all the interesting questions that I could come up with regarding that artwork cannot be answered by that base. No, I'm too early now. Hannah Hurling promotes the idea that custody can be seen as a stewardship that accompanies the life of an artwork, not clinging to a specific status in a specific point in time. And if a changeable artwork is said to conserve something of its former states, this does accumulate history without losing its lifeline to the past version. That is really a fascinating idea. And I try to apply that idea to the harsh reality of many online pieces. So we can ask whether the life of an artwork includes also various degrees of the passing. What does a broken piece of software transmit regarding earlier versions? How would an artwork's biography detailing many deaths and resurrections reveal something? What broken artworks and pieces of software could reveal is what changed in its environment that make it break in that specific way. So thus one of my next steps would be to deductively put together a changelog existing for certain APIs already via crowdsourcing and interviews. So I'm curious to see which services, programs, and platforms affected artworks most and when. And I'd like to record how they were affected and what strategies artists developed to tackle that. So this is to say that these could be a next step for interviews, and broadening the basis with interviews is necessary, but can we do more? In order to provide a basis for art historians to gain some feel for these black box levels of design, we think about complexes of visualization. Ultimately, we try to address the following question: how is it possible to create portraits of coded art that combines their coded logic with their appearance and the user affordance? I see that also as being in a certain tradition of digital humanities. In academia, those approaches who approach born digital art and cultural products with more advanced digital means are mostly coming from the media studies and the game studies. There are not too many projects that conduct basic research on digital artworks with digital humanities means. And the ones that also chose to go for putting something in front of our eyes are the following. Lev Manowicz's method of cultural analytics is designed to allow for a so-called multi-scale view onto big data pools. Multi-scale view means providing a variety of tools for visualizing an artifact or a collection of artifacts on different levels of description, thus allowing for a distant reading and for pattern recognition. For us in the Browser Art project, it is not so much a scaling endeavor, a quantitative measure, but it's more a qualitative approach, which means setting various cuts. So I imagine with our visualizations that we have kind of several like tomographic cuts through the artworks. In my view, Shane Denson and Andreas Jan Zoetman have begun to expand the multi-scale view approach that Manowicz developed for the surface into the levels of programming and modeling. They deal with about 200 game modifications of Super Mario, and no one can play through all of them for analysis. So they made a kind of a shortcut and looked into the code in a comparative way. Here the respective codes are plotted horizontally, and the parts that were altered are color-coded. The custom-made software they use provided them a panoramatic view that highlights the differences between the codes. So, and I am already getting signals that I'm speaking too long, so I'm just maybe showing you my last slides. We developed different types of visualizations. I know you can't read it, but maybe I just highlight 3 of them. Here it's a kind of a portrait showing what is actually beyond the viewport of an artwork. So we see that there is more that our monitor shows, but what is outside of that and how does the topology look like? Then we compared 2 browsers, for instance, how they render one specific website and what we can get from that. And then we have also depictions where we compare a lot of different browsers, and there, the more we compare, the more abstract the visualization need to be. And yeah, maybe just our current research project is just about to begin, is Coded Secrets. And also here we are combining different methods in order to conceptualize also the visualizations in the hope to test them for conveying insight into artworks that are code-based. So thank you very much for your attention.